3. Hey y'all, I'm Dr. Reagan, and welcome back to CRxOWN Talks, your weekly dose of health and healing in Black communities. And in 10 minutes or less, or a little bit more, we clear up myths about Black health and break down the healthcare questions you wish you'd asked and the ish they should have told you. Because we're about to be Black, healthy, and crowned. So let's get into today's topic. It's colorectal cancer. Colorectal cancer is the second leading cause of cancer death in the United States. And stop me if you've heard this one, but Black Americans are more likely to get and die from colon cancer. So just think about Chadwick Boseman. Nobody really expected that. And many other folks that we may know personally that are young, and you would not expect them to have colon cancer. So we need to talk about it. So today, I am joined by Dr. Ricketta H, a nurse practitioner with over 20 years of experience in GI. So she's here to kind of help us break down some of the information we need so we are healthy. Hey, Dr. Clark.
Hey, Dr. Reagan, how are you?
Good. All right, let's jump straight into the rundown with Reagan.
Okay.
What's one myth you want to bust right now about colon cancer?
First of all, thank you for allowing me to have time on your platform. One of the myths that I would like to bust down about colon cancer is that it's not an old person's disease. Years ago, when I first started working in GI, it was considered, an old person's disease. People who were 50, 60, 70 years old, they were the ones who were the only people who had it. And so that's one of the things I would like to dispel, that colorectal cancer can occur even in young adults.
Right. And we are seeing it more and more with young people. Why do you think that is?
The research has a lot of different reasons. The research speaks about, of course, genetic predispositions. There are some genetic mutations like Lynch syndrome, Peutz-Jeghers syndrome, familial adenoma polyposis. Those things are genetically based, but it's only about 20% of the population has colorectal cancer due to a genetic mutation. Other reasons for colorectal cancer in young populations: food, different pollutants and carcinogens. One of the things I actually will support is not, I haven't really just seen a lot of literature about it, is our children are kind of what we used to see back in the day where people started smoking when they were 12. Or started, using dipping tobacco when they were 12. And so they had long pack years or long tobacco years. And I think we're seeing more of that now. I think our kids are vaping, smoking, whatever, at earlier ages. And because they're doing it at earlier ages, we're seeing it by the time they turn 30, 35, 40, they have full-blown colon cancer. But that's my observation, not to say that it's something that I've seen specifically in the literature.
We definitely need to do a episode on vaping because we don't know what's in this stuff.
No, we really don't. We don't.
We really don't. And nobody's regulating it. But if you are looking for what is making Black folks more at risk in general, right? And then the younger age too. So you mentioned genetics. And food, what types of food do you think? Is it just like high fiber diets or?
Yeah, I think a lot of our young folks are not consumers of a high fiber diet. They're more fast food, processed food, something that's quick. You put it in the microwave, pop it out and go on about your business, that type of diet. They're not a big, heavy spinach and, oatmeal type people. And then, they don't grow what grandmama cooked. Grandmama had some vegetables. You want to have some vegetables on that plate every day. You better eat them. And so our kids are not growing up with it. They're growing up with pizzas, hamburgers, French fries. And then even if they're getting stuff from the store, Hot Pockets and things that have a lot of preservatives in them. So, their diets are a big contributor to what we're seeing.
So all of these processed foods, like we need to really think about how to increase our fresh fruits and vegetables, increase our fiber and that kind of thing to kind of help us out. So I think you're 1000% correct that we are thinking about food. We're thinking about a genetic component. And it's also like an access component too.
Definitely access. Access to care is going to always be an issue in healthcare of all disease processes. And so a lot of times African Americans, they do not have the same access as other ethnic groups because of being underinsured, not having any insurance. They may be serviced in organizations that do not have resources to a GI facility or outpatient surgical center where procedures are being done. So there are a variety of reasons. Thank you for bringing up access. Access is a major barrier as it relates to health equity and a major contributor to our race having so many being high in prevalence as it relates to various disease processes.
When should we really start screening?
Oh, I mean, a million years ago when I first started practicing in GI, with the magic number was 50, age 50.
Yeah.
That's when you need to have a colonoscopy, a screening colonoscopy. But what we started realizing, especially in African Americans, is by the age of 50, we were finding full cancers that had spread it. So they weren't just localized to the colon, they had spread it to the liver or other areas within the GI system or even to bone. So what the recommendations, they changed and they said, okay, every African American needs to be screened at the age of 45. And that rested for a while just with African Americans. Those of other ethnic groups, they were still being screened at 50. And then subsequently time evolved where everybody started being screened at age 45. Yeah, again, another Ricketta thought is that we're gonna eventually get to the point where the screening age will go beyond 45, less than 45, because we're seeing so many colorectal cancers at very young ages, and at the time they're being found, they've actually metastasized. So I think we're gonna see soon that will eventually occur.
Yes, I definitely agree with that because the more we see these folks at 40, 32 that are dying of colon cancer, we're going to have to lower that number. But you mentioned the colonoscopy. Are there other ways to check for colon cancer other than the colonoscopy?
Absolutely. There are other ways of checking for colon cancer other than colonoscopy. Colonoscopy is the gold standard. That is the most accurate testing that you can do. But there are other measures like the Cologuard, the test that you see advertised on television where you're taking a stool sample and you're testing to see, if a person could be positive for colon cancer. There are other forms they're coming out with blood testing that can be done to just do a blood sample and determine whether or not someone has colon cancer. Cologuard is for screening. A fecal immunoassay test, which we call a FIT test, that's also for screening. Then the old standard fecal coat card, that's also considered a screening modality. None of the things that I just mentioned are for diagnostic purposes, which means that if a person's having a problem, rectal bleeding, change in bowel habits, weight loss, abdominal pain, none of those individuals would be considered a person who would qualify for any of those tests that I just named: Cologuard, fecal immunoassay testing, or the old school fecal coat card. None of those individuals are considered the population that you should use that with. Those individuals who are considered having an issue or having a problem, they would require a colonoscopy. Lastly, as it relates to those tests that I mentioned, if any of those are positive, they wind up having a colonoscopy. So that's why it's the gold standard, because you still wind up having to have a colonoscopy if any of them are positive.
You answered kind of my next question with what are the top signs to look for. So weight loss, you said weight loss.
Weight loss, abdominal pain, change in bowel habits, severe diarrhea, excessive constipation over time. And when I say constipation, I'm saying you're eating right and you're having constipation. Not I'm eating cheeseburgers, French fries, hot wings, I'm not any vegetables, you have, because when you come and see me, the first thing I'm going to assess is your diet. Rectal bleeding could be also an indicator for having a colonoscopy. If you have a family history of colon cancer, a family history of colon polyps. Those are indicators for needing to have a colonoscopy.
Exactly. So when you talk about family history, though, so say I have a family history and a first degree relative. First degree relative for y'all is mom, dad, brother, or sister. So say my mom has colon cancer. When should I get a colonoscopy?
So let's say your mom had colon cancer. She had a colonoscopy at age 50 and she had colon cancer. You should have your colonoscopy at age 40. So it's 10 years younger than the individual who actually had colon cancer at their time of diagnosis. So whatever their age was at the time of diagnosis, you would have your colonoscopy 10 years younger than that individual.
Okay. That's good to know. Now, y'all can count backwards from 10. So
Right.
whatever age it was, 10 years before, you need to be in there. And the blood in the stool, you talked about the blood in the stool as a top sign to look for. And that's also what the FIT test and the fecal occult blood test, I don't know what the Cologuard is, but those check for blood in the stool as one of their primary means of assessing.
All of them are going to check for blood in the stool, and which is a sign that there may be an issue with your colon and it needs to be checked out.
Okay. Now, what's stopping us from getting checked, and how do we push past that?
Well, I'll start with let's break it up into two different categories. Let's talk about our young people. I think part of the reason why they don't get checked is because they're late reporters, meaning they push through. They see a little blood in their stool. They say, "Oh, I had some hot wings last night." They see a little blood in their stool. Well, yeah, I did go out with the guys or the girls and, drink a little bit. So that must be what it is. They're having some diarrhea, or I went to Crystals, whatever. That's what they'll blame it on. So they're late reporters. And so a lot of times with young people, their ability to see themselves as, resilient and I don't get sick and I don't want to get sick is a reason why we're seeing issues with our young people. So they don't want to access the healthcare system, unless they got to. And they're going to make sure that they got to by the time they show up. So they're really going to have some problems by the time they show up. With older adults, I think, the colon is just a private place, right? It's covered up, In fact, if you're wearing pants, you're done covered up twice. It's covered up. And no one really wants to talk about that. That's not it's not even considered polite conversation, to talk about what's happening with your colon. And so I think that's a reason why it has not been discussed historically in the way that it should have been. From the beginning of my time in gastroenterology to now, it's far more discussed. It's less of an embarrassing topic or conversation. More awareness has been brought to the limelight as it relates to colon cancer and the need for colonoscopies. We've had different celebrities to get on TV and actually have a colonoscopy done. So the awareness has made it not shameful. It's something that you can actually sit at the dinner table and have a conversation about.
Right. And tell your people. So once you get yours, you can kind of talk about your experience. So this is the questions you wish you'd asked kind of point. So you answered one of them about embarrassed to say that they have rectal bleeding, or they just assume that it's hemorrhoids or something else. So she done told you, listen, you have rectal bleeding. It's probably something you want to at least think about discussing with your primary care provider or whatever provider that you see. The other question that people may wish they had asked about that is, what is the prep like for getting ready for the colonoscopy? Will I be awake?
Okay, so let's start with the prep. The prep it all depends on how you do it. So there are various ways to prep. One way that I think is just the easiest way going is what we call colonic therapy. And that's having a colonics. And that's where you kind of just, get on this table and you have your colon washed out. It's really bougie, so to speak, but it's effective. I've seen it being used in various practices, and the colon gets, really, really clean. That's if the practice has it. It's not widely used. Not even here in Memphis, it's not widely used, and it's definitely not widely used in GI practices or practices where you would get a colonoscopy done. So outside of the colonics, various preps. There are preps that, very minuscule in amount. And then you have the bigger prep. That's the Go Lightly prep. And that's a lot of liquid to drink. It really depends on what your insurance covers. Some insurances don't cover the smaller volumes of liquid that is utilized for prepping. Some insurances do. So I would definitely, when you get ready to prep, have the provider figure out what's manageable as it relates to your insurance. But the prep is the prep. You have to take it and it flushes you out, and we want it to flush you out very, very good. So that when we do the procedure, we can see. So stool in the colon does not equal a good colonoscopy. So it's important that your colon is completely clear. Colonoscopy, you are sedated. You get propofol. You don't know a thing. You don't know a thing until you wake up. When you wake up, it's over. But that's pretty much how the procedure goes.
Yeah, so that good propofol that Michael Jackson.
Yeah. And I wanted to specify what propofol is. It's an anesthetic, and it's used in typically anesthesia personnel utilizing it to put you to sleep. So the physician who's doing the procedure, people in my role as a nurse practitioner, we don't put you to sleep. We allow the anesthesia professionals to put you to sleep and wake you up.
And wake you up, right? So you will get up, yeah. So another question that they wish they asked, they heard about some at-home screening. Is that legit?
No, I wouldn't. As it relates to this, I would not do anything at home that you can buy from Amazon or get at Walgreens or whatever. If someone were to give you a test kit that you can utilize at home, it needs to come from a healthcare provider, because that's usually maybe the Cologuard or the film assay test or the old school Hemocol cards.
So what providers should be telling patients for prevention? The one thing I think they really, really need to inform folks of is, what if I don't have insurance and I'm not getting my colonoscopy because I don't have insurance?
Well, I think that when you, especially here in Memphis, and definitely I'm sure in other cities, number one, they're community-based clinics and hospital. I work at one, Regional One Health is a community-based facility that caters to indigent populations. I would suggest that you immediately, enroll yourself into their programming, because they take care of primary care and everything else, any specialty care that's needed. Those you're usually not charged because you are underinsured or you don't have insurance at all. Also, there are other facilities or primary care facilities that have contracts with different, and here in Memphis, GI practices all over the city. Church Health Center actually have contracts with private GI centers that have to write some of their business off. They can't make all the money. They want, for their tax purposes, they want to write some of the, what they do off, and they contract with these organizations to be able to provide free colonoscopies for individuals who are underinsured or don't have any insurance at all.
But thank you so much, Dr. Clark, for joining us today. Before we close out, though, what advice do you have for folks that say, I don't have no symptoms, I don't have no family history, I'm good?
What I would say to that individual is that colon cancer is asymptomatic in its earliest stages. In the later stages, that's when you have the weight loss. You may see rectal bleeding, or you may have a change in bowel habits. But in its earliest stages, it could totally be you feel great. You don't have any problems at all. So that's why screening is so important. I would say to the individual that, the best time to do things like this is when you're feeling great. You don't want to wait till you're feeling bad. To have a mammogram, to have a colonoscopy, to have a prostate exam, any of these screening tests that's the purpose of screening, is to catch you while you're feeling well and to prevent you from ever having to feel bad. So that's the whole goal.
Thank you. That's perfect. I couldn't have said it better. And to everyone listening, here's your crown check for today. Screening is your strength, not your shame. Tell somebody, take somebody with you, and let's get screened early. This has been your health check-in with CRxOWN Talks. If you love this, follow Cover Your Crown, share with somebody else that needs to hear this, and subscribe to CRxOWN Talks wherever you get your podcast medicine. Consider yourselves Black, healthy, and crowned, crown secured. The information provided in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and is not intended as medical advice. Always consult with a qualified healthcare provider before making any decisions about your health. The views expressed in this podcast are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily reflect